It's weird. Almost like I've learned more about Louisiana folklore since being away than I ever did growing up there. Because in my family, things like horror, urban legend, and stories of lore weren't discussed at home. Watching a Lakers game after church? Of course. Maybe catch the BET Awards on a Sunday afternoon in June? Highly likely. It wasn't until I found my love for the strange, creepy, and unexplained that I truly began to understand how much of a spooky centric hotbed my home state really is. People love to hear the heavy hitters stories of voodoo, witches, the Rougarou, and the like. But what if I told you Louisiana holds secrets beyond the stories everyone knows? Because those stories are the ones most people have never heard before. Stories whispered about in small towns, passed down through generations. Stories strange enough that even long term Louisianians sometimes haven't even heard. And today, we're opening the book on a few of them. So turn down the lights, get comfortable, and settle in for stories from the Bayou.
Welcome to the Book of Lore.
The Bayou State has no shortage of ancient urban legends. Some meant to teach, some meant to shock, and others are meant to warn. Because the thing about Louisiana is that sometimes the fear isn't found in the monsters, rituals, or supernatural beings people talk about. Sometimes it's the land itself. Places filled with grief, with violence, with memory. Places where something terrible happened long ago, and somehow they never really left. Because down in the swamps, there are places people swear hold on to pain. Places where the water feels too still, where the air grows heavy without warning, where locals learn very quickly not to stay out after dark. And maybe that's because after enough tragedy, a place stops feeling like just a place and starts feeling alive. No other place embodies that feeling more than the bayous of southern Louisiana. To most people, the swamps and wetlands feel almost otherworldly, home to American alligators, feral hogs, birds of prey, and wildlife lurking just beneath the water surface. But beneath all that beauty, there's something unsettling about the bayou. The thick vegetation alone is enough to make some areas nearly impossible to pass through. During the day, that usually isn't much of a problem. Boaters simply find another route through the water. But at night, that's a different story. Once the sun disappears behind the cypress trees and darkness settles over the swamp, visibility becomes almost non existent. And with hidden waters, submerged debris, and miles of twisting marshland surrounding them, many boaters rely on lights to guide their way home. But not every light in the bayou is safe to follow. Because, according to Louisiana folklore, some lights aren't trying to help you. Some are trying to lure you deeper into the swamp. The legend traces back to the Acadians, French settlers exiled from Canada who eventually made their home in Louisiana. Over generations, stories spread of strange glowing lights appearing deep within the marsh on the darkest nights imaginable. The Cajuns would eventually come to call them the Feu Follet, meaning fool's fire. Others called them swamp fairies. But Whatever name they went by, the warnings were always the same. If you saw lights dancing in the darkness, do not follow them. Witnesses often describe Le Feu Follet as glowing balls of light flickering silently in the distance, sometimes hovering just above the water, sometimes weaving slowly between the trees. And according to legend, those who chased the lights often became lost within the swamp, never making it back home. One group of friends may have experienced something similar for themselves. After spending the day fishing beneath a hot summer sun, the group prepared to head back towards shore as daylight slowly began to disappear. But one friend wanted to make a final stop before leaving. Somewhere nearby was a fishing spot he had visited years earlier. The only problem? He couldn't remember exactly where it was. The group drifted through the bayou, making pass after pass through the area as the sky continued growing darker around them. Soon, some of the others began getting nervous. The light was fading fast. Finally, the friend agreed to make one last pass before heading back, and that's when they saw them. The lights. Small glowing lights flickering in the distance through the trees. Believing he had finally found the fishing spot, the friend slowly guided the boat toward them. But almost immediately, he felt something wrong. The lights didn't move naturally. And even stranger, the closer they got, the faster the lights seemed to move toward them. At first, he thought it was just his imagination, until he realized the boat had nearly stopped moving completely. But the lights were still rapidly closing the distance between them. And that's when the panic set in. The friend immediately turned the boat around and sped back toward shore. None of them could explain what they saw that night. And maybe there's a scientific explanation for stories like these. Scientists today believe sightings of Le Feu Follet may simply be marsh gas caused by decomposing organic matter releasing methane into the air, creating strange glowing lights above the swamp. But for many Louisiana locals, that explanation still doesn't account for what they swear they've seen. Because stories of strange lights appearing out in the bayou continue to be told to this day. Some even claim sightings have occurred far from the swamp itself, including reports of glowing orbs floating silently between headstones and graveyards throughout Louisiana. And maybe every story has a logical explanation. But if you ask the people who grew up near those swamps, most will tell you the same thing. If you ever see lights dancing in the darkness deep within the bayou, don't follow them. And maybe that's what makes Louisiana folklore so unsettling. Because the stories rarely begin with violence. They begin with something subtle. A strange light in the distance. A sound carried through the trees. A feeling that something isn't quite right. And by the time people realize the danger they've wandered into, it's already too late. But while some legends warn of spirits and strange lights hidden deep within the swamp, others speak of something far more physical, something hungry. Because long before modern Louisiana existed, stories were already being whispered about a creature said to stalk the area surrounding Bayou Goula. A creature many believed wasn't entirely human anymore. They believed him to be a vampire. But hidden within Iberville Parish is a small Louisiana community tied to the legend that has nearly faded away with time. The town of Bayou Goula. Long before highways and passing traffic, Bayou Goula was little more than a remote settlement surrounded by water, swamp, and endless stretches of wilderness. The kind of place where everyone knew each other and where strangers stood out immediately. According to local legend, sometime during the early 1800s, a mysterious traveler arrived to town. no one seemed to know exactly where he came from, only that he appeared suddenly and somehow managed to charm nearly everyone he met. He carried very few personal belongings and kept mostly to himself. And despite being an outsider, many locals described him as polite, intelligent, and unusually charismatic. But before long, something in Bayou Goula began to change. People started getting sick. Others were found dead under strange circumstances. And according to rumors whispered throughout the settlement, several bodies appeared pale, almost completely drained of blood. Fear spread quickly through the isolated community, especially once people began noticing the traveler always seemed to appear shortly before another death occurred. Soon, whispers began moving through the town. Whispers that the stranger wasn't a man at all, but something far worse. And then, just as suddenly as he arrived, he disappeared. No goodbye, no explanation, gone without a trace, leaving behind little more than fear, suspicion, and a story that still lingers in Louisiana folklore centuries later. Because in places as isolated as Bayou Goula once was, sometimes fear can spread through a town just as quickly as any monster ever could. And maybe that's why stories like the Vampire of Bayou Goula has survived for so long. Not necessarily because people believed every detail, but because isolated places have always had a way of turning fear into folklore. Especially in Louisiana, where the swamps, rivers, and bayous have witnessed generations of tragedy, violence, and loss. Because down here, people don't just believe places can be haunted. They believe places can hold on to anger. And perhaps no Louisiana legend embodies that idea more than the story of a small fishing village once located along the edge of Lake Pontchartrain, a place called Frenier, a town many believe was destroyed by a curse. Deep within the marshes and bayous of southern Louisiana sits what remains of a fishing village slowly being reclaimed by the swamp itself. Weathered cabins collapse beneath years of decay. Overgrown vegetation stretches across lands where homes and businesses once stood. And what was once a thriving community has long since become a ghost town. Because, according to Louisiana legend, the village of Frenier was cursed by one of its own, and her name was Julia Brown. Known throughout the area as a midwife, healer, hoodoo practitioner, and sometimes even a witch, townspeople often came to her for remedies, spiritual guidance, and protection. Others came seeking something darker, a curse, a hex, or revenge. Despite the rumors surrounding her, many locals still cared deeply for Julia Brown, often referring to her affectionately as Auntie Julie. And nearly every morning, people claimed they could hear her singing from the porch of her small home near the edge of the swamp. But according to legend, those songs weren't simply harmless hymns. They were warnings. One day I'm gonna die, and I'm gonna take all of you with me. Over time, many residents began dismissing her behavior entirely. Some believed she was becoming unstable. Others assumed it was nothing more than the ramblings of an aging woman slowly losing touch with reality. So eventually, people stopped listening. That is, until September 29th, 1915, the day Auntie Julie died. Despite growing fearful of her in later years, much of the town still attended her funeral. But as her burial began, the skies darkened. Rain started falling over Frenier, and then the winds came. And within hours, What began as a storm transformed into a devastating hurricane tearing directly through the region. Homes were ripped apart, entire families vanished beneath floodwaters, and the fishing village of Frenier was almost completely destroyed. In the aftermath, survivors began connecting the tragedy back to Julia Brown's warning. The woman many once dismissed as mad had seemingly predicted the destruction of the town itself. Today, little remains of old Frenier beyond scattered ruins, overgrown land, and the stories still passed down throughout Louisiana. Stories warning that some places hold on to tragedy long after the people are gone. And maybe the hurricane that destroyed Frenier was nothing more than a terrible coincidence. But to this day, many still wonder if Auntie Julie took the town with her exactly as she promised she would. And maybe that's why Louisiana folklore feels different from stories told anywhere else. Because beneath the cryptids, curses, and ghost stories, there's almost always something deeper hiding underneath. Loss, isolation, fear. Places where tragedy settled in so deeply that people began believing the land itself remembered what happened there. From strange lights drifting through the bayou to whispers of the vampire hidden within a remote Louisiana settlement, to a forgotten fishing village many believe was swallowed by a curse. The swamps of Louisiana have become more than scenery in these stories. They become part of the horror itself. And maybe that's why these legends continue surviving generation after generation. Because after enough tragedy, some places stop feeling just like places at all. And maybe that's what truly unsettles people about Louisiana lore. The idea that somewhere deep within those swamps, the grief, fear, and suffering left behind never truly disappear. It simply became part of the land itself. And that marks the close of entry 10 in the Book of Lore. If you enjoyed today's entry, please be sure to follow the show and join us next time as we uncover even more legends, lore, and unexplained stories from around the world. Until next time, stay curious and keep turning the page.
Before we close this entry, I'd like to hear from you. Every town has its stories. A haunted road nobody drives after dark, a local legend passed down for generations, an encounter someone swears really happened. If there's a legend from your hometown, a strange experience you've lived through, or a story you'd like to see explored in a future entry of the Book of Lore, send it my way. Some stories refuse to stay buried. Yours might become the subject of a future entry. So until next time, keep turning the pages. New episodes of the Book of Lore release every Tuesday. Please rate, follow, and review. It greatly helps the show. Have any other lovers of lore in your life? Share with your friends, family, and loved ones to help the show become a place for lovers of the spooky, mythical, and creepy to come together. You can follow the show on Instagram, TikTok, and Threads at Book of Lore Pod. Have a great week, and thanks for listening.